Good evening, everybody. This is the Week 12 recap show plus Week 13 opening reactions to all of the opening odds. You'll get my impressions on what we're going to see for the big Thanksgiving week ahead. Before we get there, we're going to talk about everything we saw happen so far in week number 12. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. If you're listening to this on Monday morning, hopefully your Monday is off to a fantastic start. Quick programming note. As historically I've done on the Simple Handicap podcast, Thanksgiving week, no Thursday show, no Friday show. Just haven't got a lot of traffic on those 2 days specifically. Understandably, it's Thanksgiving. And so with that comes time with friends and time with family, and the morning routine is broken up. So this week will be this show tonight, perhaps acting as your Monday morning show. There'll be a Tuesday morning, and then I will end with the Wednesday live stream preview at 9 a.m. Pacific on Wednesday, and that will be uploaded immediately. I'll tinker around and debate if that's going to be pre-recorded or posted live like I did last week. But there will be this show Tuesday and Wednesday. So keep that in mind if you're waking up Thursday or Friday morning and going to the podcast feed. That's why there would not be any shows there. In terms of week 12 overall, something that frustrates me a bit this year is a lot of content and picks are divided. And depending on when you listen, where you're listening, you get kind of a different set of games effectively, and that's kind of a natural thing that happens when you're doing every game content on the NFL every single day of the week. And so if you watched the Wednesday live stream preview and you followed along in the comment section on the pin comment, you had a winning week. If you followed along on just VSiN, had a losing week. If you followed along on the Sam P video, you had a winning week. I mean, everything's just kind of divided up. Overall, for me, everywhere that I've gone slightly ahead, but the big game tonight, obviously, with the Sunday Night Football total on the service is going to be the decider, and the service is always the most important. And so it kind of frustrates me a little bit how divided things have become, and it's sort of like a segment in time of when the picks are given out looking backwards. And so a lot of clunkers, to put it lightly, this week, but overall ahead, and hopefully everybody was able to check the pin comment in order to benefit from that. So let's go through everything we saw in week 12. This should be a quicker than usual recap, as a lot of the games were very straightforward. And then we'll spend a little bit of extra time on the week 13 openers. Good slate of games ahead. Want to say hello to Ryan Roberts, back for another show. Good to see you. Also seeing Jeffrey, Sean as well. Michael B, no Lulu Polo. I have honestly been moving basically to the couch and to the office, and even sitting in the chair. I did last week's all pre-recorded. Just finally for the first day been able to put a little bit of weight on the foot, and so sitting in the chair isn't so painful. And so I look less than 100%, to put it lightly. So the Lululemon polos have got the week off so far. So here I am, hopefully suitable enough to get through an hour-long live stream video. Good to see back in the chat as well. Some more familiar faces, lots of comments so far on the Washington Survivor. Seeing good CLV this week, and Michael B, casualty is a vibe. Yes, it is. That's Thanksgiving week for everybody. We'll take it easy this week as well. David also said, love the Sunday shows. I appreciate that. A great comment on the YouTube live stream preview from Wednesday that got a lot of likes and a lot of attention was just kind of identifying who the audience is. I don't have the name of the person who posted it. A lot of people responded well to that in the coverage of the games, and so that was good to see as well. So appreciate everybody for always, as you watch through the show, drop your comments in. I'll get to them as we go. Let's start with looking back here on NFL week number 12. First game up, Detroit 24, Indianapolis 6. And so, again, there was some good this week, and there was some bad. And this was the bad of it, as the Colts do not really ever have a chance to cover. I feel like in years past, any of the last 17 that I've been betting, whatever the number is by this point, this game and the way that the market moved on game day with Colts money coming in, and you see it within a one-score deficit later in the game into the third quarter, into the fourth quarter, this just played out like the game where, again, like all of these seasons past, there would be that inevitable home underdog drive to sneak in and get the cover. It just wasn't the case, because the fact is the Colts, they didn't get a first down until the final drive of the game, past the 8-minute mark in the second quarter. So the Colts went more than 35 minutes of actual game time without getting a first down. It just kept running through 3 and outs, 3 and outs, 3 and outs. It was really bad for Indianapolis, and they really got away from the ground game as the game progressed, and I thought that was something that was a big negative for them. What happened to Indy was the first two drives of the game, you settle at the Detroit 4 and 11 for field goals, and Detroit bookended those with touchdown drives to take the lead. But then Indy just fell into this trap a bit where they just had Richardson dropping back and throwing into coverage on long down and distance. We're not having a lot of success on first down. And that's not the game that Richardson can play and be successful in. He finishes 12.4% below expectation. There was just no answer. And nothing came easy for him either from the play calling. His expected completion percentage was just 51%, which is one of the lowest marks of the week, to go along with his lowest completion percentage relative to expectation mark of the week. So it was difficult throws on difficult down and distance with inaccuracy. That was just a problem all game for Indy. And again, no first downs until the last touch of the game past the 8:16 mark of the second quarter, believe it or not. Lions were the complete opposite. It was a sustained offense. They were a net plus 22% in success rate, which is just a crazy number to see. And again, they had 15 more first downs. And so like they're walking up and down the field. Indy couldn't get off the field as often as they wanted, especially late in the game, where again, they held the Lions to 5.4 yards per play. So the Colts defense did hold up. You hold Detroit to 24. It was just that offense for Indy that was consistently in bad positions throughout the course of the game and couldn't do anything with it. Kansas City 30, Carolina 27. Hopefully some folks with that Panthers win total, we're sweating this one out a little bit at the end. They needed a turnover at the end to have a chance to get it. But looking at this game as a whole, this was the best Chiefs offensive output since their Monday Night Football game against the Saints back in week 5 or 6 off the top of my head. That was early mid-October. It's been a long time since the Chiefs have done anything like this on offense. 391 yards, 5.8 yards per play. This game shows 30-27 on the scoreboard. It's a young kicker for the Chiefs, getting them the win at the buzzer, but it wasn't as tight as it looked. And I'll say that the Chiefs consistently were settling for field goals at a couple of drives, even being up 20-6 at the half. They could have extended that lead further. Drive stalled out at the Carolina 5, at the Carolina 7. So that first half deficit could have been a lot bigger. And then what happened throughout the course of the game is not only were the Chiefs failing to convert in the red zone on a couple of key drives, they're running to Bryce Young, who has his game of his career. And it reminded me a lot of the Zach Wilson, where he had that game last year for the Jets, where he had his game of his career against this Chiefs defense. And I struggle with this a little bit because obviously the Chiefs defense is phenomenal, but was this a game where it was the Chiefs defense showing something that we don't think that they are? Or is this just a young team at home with a young QB with nothing to lose that just had an all-in effort in a spot where the Chiefs are in a bit of an odd scheduling spot? I know the Chiefs have issues in terms of depth at corner and some of these guys being attacked. And you saw some receivers that shouldn't have had big games have big games for the Carolina Panthers. Bryce Young finishes 5.7% above expectation for 7.5 yards per pass. Things came pretty easy for the Panthers. But again, is it a negative for the Chiefs, or is this just a spot that gets Carolina elevated to a level they're not, and then a Chiefs defense that maybe kind of mailed this in a little bit? It was a weird game in that perspective. The Panthers able to come back and tie it late. But they cannot get the stop on the final drives, aided by a long run by Patrick Mahomes, who was able to get out and scramble. As we continue to talk about some issues for the Chiefs, we saw Patrick Mahomes sacked several times, 5 times in total, sack and a half for Clowney. And this was a game, again, where you see some of those issues on the O-line for the Chiefs, where they've been so solid in recent seasons. Some issues up front in protection. There's some issues at depth at corner. And we'll see how that maybe hampers them as we get into the final month of the season ahead. They've got the Black Friday game coming up on deck. Ryan Roberts giving a shout out to Bryce Young. Well-deserved. He's played very well the last couple of weeks, I've thought. It hasn't been page-jumping numbers like this one, but certainly played well today for sure. Minnesota on the road at the Chicago Bears. Vikings 30, Chicago 27. Fun game, came down to the wire, got weird in a hurry. Want to point out the performance of Sam Darnold in this one. Even without Justin Jefferson, who had he was almost stat sheet irrelevant by the end of the game. Incredibly, despite having a good matchup against the Bears secondary, Sam Darnold throws for 330, 2 touchdowns, no picks, finishes 7.7% above expectation. And what was impressive about this specifically is, again, it wasn't easy for Darnold in this spot. His expectancy was just 57%, pardon me. And so to beat that number, whereas a lot of tough throws, that's the 5th lowest mark of the week, to exceed that number without Justin Jefferson having a big game, that's the Vikings winning in a bit of a different way, something we haven't seen. Addison and Hawkinson combined for 284 yards on 18 targets and 15 receptions were unstoppable. A bit of a different look for the Vikings in this spot. The Bears defense up front continues to have issues with some of the injuries that they have suffered. Nose tackle position in the interior of that D-line. And Aaron Jones had a solid game on the ground, looks fully healthy from that rib issue that he's been suffering with the last couple of weeks. This game goes to overtime. The Bears win the toss. The Bears have a chance to drive down and get the win. But it wasn't 30-27 competitive back and forth. Minnesota outgained the Bears by 1.5 yards per play. It was, again, another game we see Minnesota, kind of like 2 weeks ago against the Jags, where they won 12-7. It was more about them just not finishing in the red zone. Minnesota got the ball in the red zone 7 times in this game, converted on just 3 of them. So this game was really Minnesota walking the ball up and down the field, and then it gets weird late. They're up 27-16. They concede a 40-yard touchdown drive to Chicago. They do not recover the onside kick. The Bears set up the field goal. And then again, it takes the Vikings drive in overtime to come back and get the win. But this was quite a dominant game from the Vikings, a very good game from Sam Darnold. And it is the Bears now, back-to-back weeks, losing heartbreakers from their perspective. In the division, you start to look at their season being all but done. They got another tough division on deck bright and early Thursday morning. Dallas 34, Washington 26. Another one of the clunkers for me this week. So I was on Washington -10. I tell you, I don't know what to make of this. Now, a positive, I guess, that comes from this is in the pinned comment thread, McLaurin receiving yards over. Got a good break down at the end of the game where he catches an 81 Hail Mary that sets up the field goal miss or the extra point miss for Washington on the try after. That leads to Dallas returning the onside kick and making this 34-26. Another positive was the over, again, from the pinned comments. 41 points in the fourth quarter, always nice for an over. So that worked out well. But from the side perspective, just a misread on my part for Washington. And this wasn't all bad. I think as it scrolling through social media, I get the impression that this was really ugly. And like it was to an extent, but I don't want it to be overlooked. It's just how many mistakes and kind of weird things Washington did that cost themselves. And so they missed a field goal early after blocking a kick on the Cowboys' opening drive. They threw a pick at the Dallas 32. They fumbled deep in their own zone. They missed 2 extra points, one of which could have forced the game into overtime. It's really hard for me to understand what this Commanders team is at the moment. Earlier in the season, going into the Philly game, going into the Pittsburgh game, it was easy to look at them and say, like, this is phony. They're stepping up in class, good defenses. It's going to look different. Jaden Daniels dealing with the injury. This game should have been a walkthrough for them against this Cowboys defense. And it just wasn't. And they weren't getting the balls to wide receivers. The outside passing game wasn't prioritized, even though we saw Daniels running more, 71 yards on the ground, signaling he's a little bit healthy. Like, is this Cliff Kingsbury with another offense that's been figured out by opponents? I'm going to be very curious to see if McLaurin was moved around. He's been very static in terms of how Washington has handled him on the field. But we're seeing Washington hit a bit of a wall, and that wall might become a little bit more substantial when you consider both running backs that they have, a huge part of this offense, left the game in this spot. Dallas with the quick turnaround, going to get guys back. We'll talk about them in the Week 13 openers, because there's a lot to look at there. Comment section coming in. Ross Reed says, love this show. Such damn good insight. I appreciate it very much. Glad to have you back for another show watching. David Rosansky says, big play towards McLaurin's season total yards over. Yes, it is. I think it was 9:10, 9:15, if I believe it or well. I did that with the the Smiley Kaufman preview podcast on the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour crossover season preview. That preview's looking pretty good. It was recorded the Wednesday before the Thursday night week 1 kickoff. So that might be a recap to offset the Cowherd appearance, which was part of the Panthers exclamation mark and an emphasis on that one. Tampa Bay 30, New York Giants 7. Talked about a clunker and 2 wins in the last one. This was a bad one. And I talked about it on the pod Thursday, Friday. I was like, I regret this. Of all the bets I've made in 2024, this is the one I regret most. And this is the one I wish I would have got off. When you start getting on and off bets late in the week, it gets really messy. This was a bad bet. It was a bad read. And again, it was talked about on the podcast Thursday, Friday, where it's like this could be a game where that switch over from Drew Lock to start DeVito, it isn't maybe that bump and that minor reset. It could very well be a sign of quit. And if Malik Neighbors' post-game presser is any indication of it, it's a whole lot of the latter. And if Brian Daboll's play calling in game is any indication of it, it's a whole lot of the latter as well. The Daboll reference that I would make is it's the second half. You're down 23-0 at the time. You're finally throwing the football. They only ran 15 plays in the first half, did the Giants. So honestly, they didn't have a lot of time to throw the football against a banged up Bucs secondary that's been underperforming, and the defensive line for the Buccaneers just dominated this whole game. So get out and throw the football. They walked down the field with a great drive coming out of the half. And they're 1st and goal from the 3 or the 4 yard line. And all of a sudden, it's DeVito motioning out to the sideline to line up as a wide receiver. And it's Tyrone Tracy in the shotgun running the read option. Sure enough, he fumbles, and that was it. You get a score there. Okay, bit of a different ballgame. But what inspires Brian Daboll to make that play call in that spot? I start to look at this Giants team, and it's like, is there something else going on here? Why was Drew Lock not the quarterback in this game is a question nobody has the answer for. Some of the play calling, just odd from Daboll and the Giants in this spot. Bad bet, bad mistake. Giants do not win, do not even come close to covering. In terms of the Buccaneers, again, the defensive line dominated, but I did my post-game write-up for this midway through the fourth quarter. It was Bucs 430 to 130, 300 more yards total output, 7.9 to 4.4 yards per play. Buccaneers were plus 15% in net success rate. And so, this was never close. It was one-sided. It was dominant. And the Buccaneers have some life in that division as they get another game behind a good performance from Baker Mayfield. Miami 34, New England 15. Good win here on the over. Was also a Sam P video winner to get that finally to 10-9 on the season. That has been a grind of 50-50 splits all season long. So finishes 34-15. Let's talk about New England's scores in this game. One of them was a 4th and 15 late in the third quarter that was effectively a Hail Mary from Drake May to find the wide open tight end on the goal line that the Dolphins lost in coverage as they were pressuring him out of the pocket. The second score was in a position where the Dolphins thought the game was over early fourth quarter. They bring in Skylar Thompson to give Tua the entire quarter off. And on the second play from scrimmage, there was a fumble that Christian Gonzalez picks up off a hop and returns it 63 yards for a touchdown. And I bring that up because I want to illustrate that on one hand, you have a Pats team that continues to fight in the fourth quarter. Since Drake May took over as starting quarterback, offensive metrics are up across the board, but this team is 13th in EPA per play in the fourth quarter. They're 12th in success rate in the fourth quarter. They've been scoring points in the fourth quarter to stay alive in games. And today you saw some of that, but it was a lot more misleading than what you've seen in games past. The point is, on one hand, you have a Pats team that is fighting into the second half. A lot of motivation for this team to get wins for Kraft, but also to keep going with their rookie quarterback. So on one hand, that's a positive. On the other hand, what was visible to me in this game is an improving Dolphins defense, but also a visual indication of what happens when you have a Pats team with a young quarterback behind an offensive line that is struggling, that is costing themselves with penalties. And it was bad for the Pats. The score line and the box score doesn't fully reflect it, But in the first half, every drive that New England had anything going, it was a back-breaking holding penalty. It was a call on the offense that backed them up. Like, it was really bad. And so on the end, the final tally is 10 penalties for 75 yards. There were many that were not accepted. And it was just so costly for New England. So all the mistakes for the Pats were compounding on offense. And that kind of takes away from some of the shine of here's a team that's fighting and trying hard down the stretch. Now, what I will say on the defensive side, this was a bit of a blunder from the Pats. Miami, the last couple of weeks with Tua, have seen teams that play a lot of soft shell coverage and force everything quick underneath. His intended air yards the last couple of weeks, 3.8, 4.2. His depth of target, really short. You look at his passing charts, and I mean, it's this much of the screen that's taken up with all of his targets. It's just really quick, short passes consistently. The Pats came out in this game, and they're like, well, we're just going to play man coverage the whole game. Not a good idea against Waddle, Hill, and others. And, I mean, it was a coaching clinic from McDaniel. I think he was caught off guard early because he's like, are they really going to do this? And then in the second quarter, he's like, okay, they're going to do this. And sure enough, he just turned it around. And the Dolphins scored 24 points in the second quarter. And, I mean, the offense was humming from that point on. They didn't have to do much in the fourth quarter, but that was a big mistake. And in terms of how easy it was and what McDaniel was able to do, expected completion percentage for Tua was 72.5% in this game. It's like we're just talking about Richardson at 50% and Darnold at 52%. To put into illustration how easy some of these throws were for Tua, 72% is a really high number. And that was just all McDaniel and this scheme doing everything they can when they get a heavy dose of man coverage. It was just too easy for Miami. A lot of the times, there's another soft performance for the Pats defense. Tennessee 32, Houston 27. Surprising outcome. Didn't have an opinion on this game at all pregame. And it turns out that this was one of the more surprising games of the entire week. The Titans played well and played well in spite of some protection issues. They outgained the Texans by 109 yards, 0.8 per play, 1.3 per pass, 1.6 per rush. It was a clean sweep for Tennessee on the road in Houston in terms of all the box score metrics. Levis sacked 9 times, 7 times in the first half. Was just constantly under duress, but you take the good with the bad. Long completions of 39, 63, and 70 to 3 different receivers. He finishes with a 123 rating and completes 75% of his passes. Expected completion, highest of any quarterback so far this week, which forces him under expectation. But when you look at, again, how easy some of these throws were for him, that's pretty damning for this Houston Texans defense and the matchup they had where they were able to generate a lot of pressure. That, to me, saying, like, what's going on in coverage and why was everything so easy and wide open for Levis in this spot? Because we haven't seen a lot of great games stacked consistently without mistakes for Levis throughout his career. And to do it in this spot on the road in Houston, very impressive from him, but also equally poor and perhaps damning for this Houston Texans defense and what they were unable to do. Titans defense strong again, especially against the run. Houston with Mixon just 22 yards on the ground. And all these recaps, it feels like for a long time, we're talking about how Mixon was the driver of the offense, carrying things for this team when Stroud was really struggling. And you see today, you have Stroud struggling, but then you have Mixon unable to contribute. And this offense looks really poor for the Texans. All that said, 24-23 early fourth quarter, and then they give up the 70-yard reception. They missed a kick after the 2-minute warning, which could have tied the game up. Just an ugly game for Houston. And I see on the timeline, I see on Twitter, I see on the other apps, there's talk about, is it the sophomore slump? What is it? I think Bobby Slowick deserves some criticism in this spot. I think CJ Stroud deserves some criticism. But, man, if you're able to generate this much pressure on a team like Tennessee and a quarterback like Levis, and you give up some of these numbers, that's pretty damning on the defense too. And so this is a well-rounded issue for Houston all the way. Now, if there's one positive for Houston Texans fans and the team overall, when you're looking at the division, the Colts lose, the other 2 teams are irrelevant, And so this loss isn't as costly as it could have been. So they get away with that a little bit considering their cushion. And we will see what happens going forward. But a ugly loss for Houston in this spot at home. Denver 29, Las Vegas 19. I do wonder if there was perhaps a threat at the backdoor cover in this game. I came on air as it was 29-19. I'm just looking at the play-by-play right now. It looks like the Raiders did drive down 1st and goal at the Denver 1, and they were unable to get the ball into the end zone as Desmond Ridder was sacked at the one yard line. So Denver Broncos ticket holders rejoice. I tell you, like, this has been a lot of the season, and I don't want to get into like a sharp square divide thing or what have you, but I talked about it in the Colts game. A lot of times in seasons past, you're taking these numbers. You're never making a bet expecting the late score in the second half or what have you. It seems like in a lot of these games that are very one-sided in how they're being bet and some of the market movement, the side, if you will, like the traditional side that you would see in betting, in this case, the Raiders with the inflated number, or like how the Colts were getting bet on game day and that one came down with everybody piling on the Lions. The way that the opposite of the side, if you will, has been running this season is like, it feels like it's extremely one-sided. And that's kind of making it a bit of an odd year. And I know a lot of shows in the space, podcast, YouTube streams, media that's published online, been a bit of struggle for a lot of different folks. And I think that's playing into some of the issues potentially too, because there's like some of these sides that you're used to looking at and being intrigued to bet. And it's just, there's not a lot of these late games that are breaking the way of the side, if you will. And so I think that's been an interesting talking point that's existed throughout the season. Now, in this game specifically, the Denver Broncos are just playing like a confident football team. And what I thought was impressive from them in this game that I watched a good portion of was, for the first time in a win and a good performance from the Broncos, the run game was not driving them to the victory. When we've seen them get really comfortable in games and run up scores and win, it's been a lot of the ground game aiding the success and opening up the pass. They've got a great offensive line. There's no question about it. But in this game, there wasn't much of a ground game to support them. 22 carries, 63 total yards, 2.9 per rush. This was Bo Nix and the passing game kind of without the safety net, working their way down the field in the game where they're trailing. They can't get the ball in the end zone. They're settling for field goals, getting the breakthrough in the second half. And this was on Nix in the passing game. And so this is really the first game of the year where we've seen that be the case. And I thought it was impressive. I mean, this is a confident football team that the betting market loves. And we're seeing them get bet up every single week. And we're seeing them continue to win and cover numbers in the recent weeks. And this is pretty telling that they can now win a game in this manner when the run game and the bread and butter of the offense is not working. Now, on one hand, it is the Raiders defense. It was down multiple corners. You had some guys out there. So perhaps some of this is the game plan that worked out. But the Raiders, especially in the first half, like this felt like when you're watching it, you're like, okay, this is that divisional game, like the Bears-Packers last week, like the Browns-Steelers on Thursday night, where that home team as the dog is fully bought in. And you're kind of viewed as the team that's out of it against the team that's trending well. They're faking punts in the first half. They're picking them up. Pierce is animated on the sideline. And I think it's even more impressive that the Broncos were able to weather that storm and then get stops in the second half and convert it through the passing game. So impressive win, impressive cover for the Broncos. Looks like it was a sweat for a lot of folks down the stretch. Denver 29, Las Vegas 19. Seattle 16, Arizona 6. Pardon me if I missed the garbage time score in this one. Do correct me in the chat. It looks like it did finish 16-6 in the chat. When I look at this game specifically, the Seahawks defense continues to look like a unit that is improving and very real. Like it feels like Mike McDonald has got this sorted out. Trey McBride is a problem. He's a problem for everybody. And the Seahawks, that was going to be a tough matchup for them. Like that was something that was going to exist. It was predetermined. Like McBride is going to have a big game, and he certainly did, going for 133 yards, made up nearly half of Kyler Murray's total passing output. What was impressive to me in this spot was that the Seattle Seahawks run defense. Remember, Mike McDonald has been making these changes at linebacker to get things right in that area. The Arizona Cardinals could not run the football on this Seahawks defense. Trey Benson, 4 carries for 18 yards. DeMercado, 1 carry for 14. James Conner, 7 carries for 8 total yards. I mean, this Seahawks defense continues to improve week after week. I thought that was very impressive from them in this spot. Yes, you concede the big game to McBride. The Seahawks are going to be struggling against tight ends. That's going to be something consistent, especially out of looks like this. I don't think McDonald has the personnel to get that right. But the fact that he's been able to elevate this defense and figure out how to defend the ground game like this, and even last week against McCaffrey and the 49ers, it just continues to improve every single week. With that said, you look at some of the box scores and you're like, okay, Arizona, 5.3 to 4.7 yards per play, 298 to 285, 0 for 2 in the red zone. Like, did the Cardinals leave points out here? I think Seattle was the team that left points out. It was another just back-breaking and mind-numbing interception thrown from Geno in the red zone, and he nearly gave it back on the next drive. He got very lucky that a tipped ball was not picked by a running back where he missed Walker. And then on another throw, he's scrambling to his right, put the ball in just the tightest of windows. That had pick 6 written all over it. It was kind of, to me, looking like it was a Rams game all over again, where we see the Seahawks kind of crumble late. But I say the box score was not misleading when you look at some of those stats, because when you go to the advanced side of things, yes, the counting stats and the box score and the per play metrics say one thing, but, and these numbers are aided a little bit by the Cardinals' final drive. They were worse than this. The Arizona Cardinals in this game had a 14% rushing success rate. That's second percentile. You never see teams that low, ever. They had a 34% overall offensive success rate, which is a 12th percentile game. And from an EPA per play perspective, they finished minus 0.22, which is a 23rd percentile performance. And so in total, the Seahawks in this game, Geno versus Murray, Geno was a quarter point better per snap in this game, and the Seahawks were a net 7% in success rate. And so counting stats say one thing, advanced stats say a bit of the other. And again, you have that interception there that was just brutal in that spot, where he just, that pick was so bad. There was no reason for it. And there was 3 of it. So that was a little bit misleading in that perspective, but I don't want anyone to jump in the box score and say, hey, this could have been misleading. I don't believe it was, watching that game. Green Bay 38, San Francisco 10. So this played out as expected. We talked about it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on the pod and the live stream preview. Brock Purdy's hurt. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday played out. Brock Purdy is in fact hurt. He misses. Brandon Allen gets put into the game, and this was Packers dominating from start to finish. Now, we just talked about a game where the box score was a little bit odd and misleading in a way. This is another one that kind of fits that criteria. You look at the ESPN and the counting stats, 5.1 to 4.9 per play for the 49ers. At one point in the fourth quarter, the Niners were a full yard per play better. And from a total yardage output perspective, it was the Packers late. Again, going into the midway point of the fourth quarter, this was a game that was priced, or it was in the box score very close. The Packers had a 60-yard drive, but the two teams were almost equal going into the midway point of the fourth quarter. And so this game, even though the box score is 38-10, even though the Packers were up 17-0, watching it for the first quarter and a half, it felt like the Packers were in complete control because the 49ers offense couldn't do anything, and the Packers were just dominating the 49ers defense on the ground. But from like the midway second quarter point to the midway fourth quarter, that dominance from Green Bay just wasn't there like it was. And they got some breaks in this game, certainly. The one that went against them was Christian Watson dropping a walk-in touchdown, and that was the play on a drive that was just before halftime. And it was really from that point on, like watching the game, it felt like that drop from Watson kind of changed the Packers from being on script in their play calling and being ahead of things to just being a little bit lost and frustrated in a way, because it took some luck in the second half for them to get back in full control of the game. It went into the break 17-7, and you're thinking San Francisco just went down the field, 11 plays, 85 yards, looked dominant. Now they're coming out and they're driving. It's coming out of the break in the third quarter. They get down to the Green Bay 39, 4th and 2. They go for it. The Packers get a stop. Still, it's a punt from Green Bay right after. 49ers driving right back down the field again. They get to the Packers 45, and it's a pick that goes back for a big return, and then Green Bay pounces on a short field. But in terms of other shorter fields, the 49ers had a fumble, which led to a 16-yard touchdown in the third quarter, and then it was a McCaffrey fumble after a big gain that was taken away that led to another touchdown for Green Bay. And so there were some big plays for San Francisco that turned into mistakes and turnovers that went back the other way for the Packers that made this look a little bit better than it actually was. I don't want to take away from the Packers some of the dominance in this, but 38-10 is more generous for Green Bay than it is damning for San Francisco. Before we get into the Week 13 openers, a lot to talk about in some of these games. Just want to recap some of the comments in here. Rudy's back for another show. This is helping out a lot this week. Mountain Open for snowboarding yesterday, and I missed the first half of all the early games today. Wow, I hope you're enjoying the cold weather and the snow and the conditions for skiing. I heard a lot of that from comments too, not skiing specifically, but that this recap is done really well at catching everybody up right after this. So I'm glad to hear that that is in fact the case. Looks like I said Geno touchdown instead of interception in the red zone. Geno had a terrible INT TD. He's so liable to make this. I messed something up there. Rudy called me out too. Says Adam mentions it. So I'm not sure exactly what I missed, but hopefully that is coming. If we get another atmosphere, Rudy, I'm done with the bomb cyclones. I'm done with the atmospheric rivers. I'm done with all of it. We have a not here specifically, but parents and friends back in the prairies. Polar vortex from Siberia pushing through the prairies today and through tomorrow and the rest of the week. So, I mean, I turn on the Weather Channel, obviously for football, but now I'm getting the YouTube clips on my feed coming through because the Weather Channel here has gone from the TV channel to the YouTube clips. The titles and clickbait in some of these are just crazy. I don't know where they're coming up with names for this. Be as it will. What I will say when it comes to weather and what we're thinking about for NFL, there's going to be some cold games in the next 2 weeks with this front that's moving in. So keep that in mind as we're looking. All right, Week 13 openers. Fun week ahead. Again, if you're catching up late or you jump to this spot, schedule this week for shows is this tonight and Monday morning, Tuesday, and then Wednesday will be the live stream preview, either pre-recorded or published live. Depends on how VSiN wants to schedule things this week and what Sam P wants to do with the video. I'll keep everybody updated. No Thursday, no Friday show for the Simple Handicap. Thanksgiving week, viewership tanks. It's understandable. On the Wednesday preview, as always, I will have the pinned comment below it that will update anything from Thursday, Friday, Saturday into Sunday morning. So be sure to keep an eye on that as the week goes. I want to say those plays are they're doing very well. But keep in mind that is the schedule this week that might be disrupted. And it is, in fact, disrupted because we have Thanksgiving and we have a triple header, as always, on Thanksgiving. Starting off with the Chicago Bears on the road at the Detroit Lions. Lions were 11.5-point favorites on the look ahead. Current price that we are seeing on the reopen is Detroit minus 10.5. Total from 49.5 is sitting steady at 49. I don't have an opinion on this one specifically. I thought I was going to. I don't have one yet. That could change. I think that the number makes sense. Part of my problem here is with Chicago specifically. This is now division game number 3 in a row. You have back-to-back heartbreakers. It is a very feeble locker room at the moment with Eberflus, with the staff. You go to overtime in that spot, coming back against Minnesota. Now you go short week turnaround to go to Detroit, who just turned out to not be tested at all by Indy. I don't have a lot here or what I'm looking at. So not much for me in this one specifically. New York Giants on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. This is unfortunate because this was, as I hinted at on some of the TikTok streams, on the streams and the podcast on Friday, I was like, this looks like an awesome spot to bet Dallas. At the time, what I was thinking was the Giants are going to be competitive against the Bucs, maybe have a chance with elevated play calling from Daboll that, hey, we're going to see the Giants in a bit of a different light. This was 2.5. And I mean, before the Commanders game, the sentiment on the Cowboys could not be lower. They were seeing game day money go against them. The Commanders were being bet earlier today. That number went up. So I'm like, the Commanders run up a 2 to 3 touchdown win against the Cowboys. This might open 1.5 for Dallas. And then Dallas has likely Brandon Cooks coming back. You have the guards potentially coming back. You have Diggs on defense potentially coming back. And I was like, if things go really bad, maybe it's Trey Lance, or at least you have Cooper Kupp. But for me, the way the Cowboys handled Friday and Saturday with the injuries, with the reports, some of the personnel, I'm like, this game for Jerry, who hasn't won a home game in nearly a year, on Thanksgiving, and how much goes into it for the Cowboys, I was like, this is the spot where it's kind of that revival and all-in effort. Unfortunately, the Giants and Daboll look horrendous, and I wonder if Daboll's even going to be the coach midweek. Probably not getting fired on a short week, but and the Cowboys come out and win outright and look great against Washington. So now this is 3.5. It's on the other side of 3. Even with the veto, I don't think 3.5 is a number that can be. It's 3.5 minus 15, shaded even higher, so it might tick up more. At this spot coming out of this week, even with the veto, I would be hard pressed to lay this number on the other side of 3 with the Cowboys. Total from 41.5 down to 38, getting bet under heavily. Miami on the road at Green Bay, late game on the Thursday triple header. Dolphins win and cover comfortably against the Patriots. Packers win and cover comfortably against the Niners, but don't look as good as perhaps they potentially could. This was 3.5 on the look ahead. We are at 3.5 currently. I do wonder if this gets down to 3 sooner rather than later. But this is going to be a game where you're going to hear a lot about it, and rightfully so. This is Miami with Tua going into Lambeau Field on Thursday night, where the forecast, because of the polar vortex coming from Siberia that's pushing through the Canadian prairies, is also going to impact Green Bay. This is going to be a game that's right around 0 Celsius, 36 Fahrenheit, freezing temperatures for kickoff. This is not like it was against Kansas City, where it was crazy cold, but this is going to be a cold weather game for Miami coming into Lambeau. We know Tua, in these games that are sub 45 degrees at kickoff, he is 0-6 in his career. We see his numbers taper off in a big way. There has been a lot of effort from Miami to get the ground game going to an extent where they can lean on that in games like this. We'll see if they're ready for that. I'm also very interested to see, what are we going to get out of the Packers defense? Is this a game where they shift and play a lot more zone than they have and dial back some of the aggression, unlike what the Pats did? I think there's a question with Hafley as well and what he's going to do and how he's going to handle this game. A lot of question marks around this game. And so I'm curious to see if there is 3.5 coming back down to 3, or maybe like an expensive 3 in this game. When I'm thinking about the composite ratings and what we were looking at last week before this game kicked off, this game was made effectively right on the money in terms of combining all the rankings from a lot of key spots. Green Bay, relative to an average team, was 3.1 points better. Miami was 1.1 point better. So you have a difference of 2 points. You get the 3.5 with the home field. I think the case, if you're looking at Green Bay, is you're saying home field's worth more because of the weather. If you're looking at what happened today, I don't think you're upgrading Green Bay a lot, especially if Romeo Doubs is in the concussion protocol and is unable to play in this game because he can't clear it on a short week. There's not enough time. You're probably upgrading Miami a little bit, which is where I'm thinking we might get to perhaps a 3.5 in this. We'll see. Friday football, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Kansas City hosting the Las Vegas Raiders. Chiefs 12.5-point favorites out to 13. I don't have a report as of the last 44 and a half minutes, but Gardner Minshew went down with what looked like a collarbone injury. He was dead armed coming off of the field, went straight to the locker room. Based on what it looked like to my football experienced eye, which is not at all a medical experienced eye, that is a collarbone injury, which is 8 weeks plus. I don't know what the full extent of that is going to be. Based on how it looked, I have a hard time believing that Minshew is going to be out there starting this game. If Desmond Ridder is in fact the starter for Las Vegas, this should be higher than 12.5 if that's what we were looking at with Minshew. I don't think you can say Ridder and Minshew are equals. I don't think the drop-off is that substantial, but Ridder on the road against the Chiefs defense is going to be worse than Minshew on the road against the Chiefs defense. And so I would think that this kind of looks like the Lions game a couple of weeks ago, where they were right around 13.5 with the Mac Jones news for Jacksonville, and then that got bumped up. I don't think it's going to be as severe in terms of the outcome, but again, Kansas City certainly gets a break here, with it likely being Desmond Ridder taking over that spot on the road. So keep that in mind if you were looking at the 12.5. I would expect that to get higher and push towards 14 as we get official confirmation on Gardner Minshew. Tennessee on the road at the Washington Commanders. Big move in this one. Washington from an 8-point favorite on the look ahead down to 5.5. Total from 43.5 down to 43. This to me looks like, again, I'll call it again. You call it the traditional spot, right? You have a Commanders team laying a big number that gets upset, that looks really bad. You have a Titans team on the road that's getting a big number. They pull the upset and look really good. Now you have the big adjustment on the look ahead line. Couldn't get much lower on Washington. Can't get much higher on Tennessee. Makes a lot of sense to bet Washington. This simple process has you profitable in the NFL for the last several years. Unlike past years, we have a lot of noise in this game that just makes it that much harder this year. In this game specifically, we don't know if Washington is going to have a running back on the field. Brian Robinson got hurt. Austin Eckler on the final drive of the game took just a violent hit, and I would only assume goes into the concussion protocol and has a very low chance to clear for this game. Washington right now, for whatever reason is going on internally, just is not getting wide receivers involved in the game plan at all. I don't know what to make of it. They've lived on the run game the last month and a half to keep their offense alive. If you take away running back 1 and 2, what does this offense look like for Washington? We just talked about Houston with Joe Mixon, who's looked incredible the last month, goes for 22 yards against this Titans run defense. Like, nobody's having success running on Tennessee. What does Washington do running on Tennessee without their best 2 backs potentially in this spot? And so it's 5.5 now. Like, does it get a little bit lower? Everything from the last 17 years of betting on the NFL says Washington is the spot, but everything about how this season has gone has me hard pressed to jump in at this moment, especially without knowing the status of those backs. Chargers, Falcons still off of the board. Pittsburgh on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals 2.5-point favorites on the look ahead. Total from 47.5 down to 47. And so from an NFL playoff picture perspective, as we're trying to figure out what is left for Cincinnati, seeing Joe Burrow walk off the field after that loss last week was pretty damning. Cincinnati has a 12% chance of making the playoffs, according to the current playoff picture. The Colts quickly in front of them, fading back. 5-7. Bengals have the game in hand. Dolphins 5-6. As mentioned, tough game on the road at Green Bay. Could also fall to 5-7 with a loss. Broncos incredibly look comfortable in that 7 seed. And that's the only team in this that it looks like the Bengals would have a chance to jump. Same thing goes for the Dolphins on the outside looking in. The Bengals on the 29th of December host the Denver Broncos. So it a bit cliche to say like, hey, here's the season, but I mean, this becomes the season for Cincinnati. They have certainly had their opportunities to win games. In this game specifically, it is very likely to come down to can this defense prevent explosive plays from Pittsburgh. The Steelers have been living on explosive plays on third down since Russell Wilson took over. Not a great recipe for the Bengals defense, which gives up so many explosives, but there is enough noise in the Steelers' numbers to where a defense that struggled as much as Cincinnati can just get the off day where things aren't quite clicking for the Steelers' offense. And like we saw the Browns do to an extent, get away with the victory. And so I do not want Pittsburgh in this game. And I could only, at this point, look at Cincinnati in this spot. Indianapolis on the road at the New England Patriots. This is a fun one to try to figure out when you're trying to decipher what you're looking at in this one. So number on the look ahead for this game specifically was Colts -2. They lose and look bad against Detroit. We see New England look bad against Miami. And this, believe it or not, is adjusted up for the Colts, who are now 2.5-point favorites across the board at -115, shaded slightly higher. The total from 41 is up to 42.5. Pats overs become a popular bet, which I agree with. Colts overs, not so much recently, but let's see what we're getting. Now, in terms of a matchup, I don't have a lot to say off the top of my head on this game specifically, but like just thinking about ratings and how you're getting anywhere close to this number. Coming into the games on Sunday, the Colts were about 2 points worse than an average team. The Pats were 6 points worse than an average team. So you're at the gap of 4 points. If you're giving the Pats 2 for home field, you get to right where this number is. And so I have a bit of difficulty saying like this number should be significantly different one way or the other. Not much of a take on this one. I'm very conflicted with what the Colts are. I mean, even today against the Lions, like their willingness to run the football, which is what they should be pushing, just wasn't there. So it's a really hard one to figure out what you're getting from the Colts on a week-to-week basis. But again, one of those teams season on the line that gets a little bit intriguing. Houston on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. It seems like Doug Peterson is going to keep his job for another week. And so the Jags are still like firmly in that quit territory. Now, the big thing in this is, will Trevor Lawrence return? This was the date he was projected to come back and the game he was projected to come back. Houston was 7 on the look ahead. They're down to 6. And so in the first meeting between these two teams, when both QBs were healthy, Houston was viewed in a much different light. That closed 6 at Houston. This game now in Jacksonville, Houston on the other side, teams in much different scenarios. I don't think this number is fully pricing in the extent of Lawrence being back. And so are you looking at this and saying, I'll take 6 or perhaps even the 6.5 that is available right now on the board and put it in my pocket and hope Lawrence is in? And if not, are you going to be that far on the wrong side of what this price could be if you're keeping your eye on news Tuesday and Wednesday? That could be a way that you look at this, because if I'm seeing a difference in these two teams around the touchdown to get to where this number is, that's pricing in closer to this being Mac Jones than it is Lawrence. It's not a lot, but it's certainly leaning towards that more so than Lawrence. And so if Lawrence is in, I do think this number does come down a little bit from where we're currently sitting at, currently at 6 across the board. Arizona on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. So again, we talked about losing that spot with the Cowboys, who are just getting blasted on the board right now up to 4. I mean, it makes sense. Sucks we lost that one. This is another one that kind of sucks that you end up losing, as the Vikings were 2.5 or even 3 on the look ahead. They're now as high as 4 on the reopen as Arizona goes into Seattle and loses. Minnesota gets away with another win on the road that they looked a lot worse than they were, which has kind of been the theme for the last 3 weeks. But it's been a tough spot for Minnesota where they're playing all these games on the road. Now they return home after 3 weeks of travel in this spot, and they're bumped up. I think rightfully so. This spot, on one hand, just screams to me Minnesota. On the other hand, you have the old Dave Malinsky adage that he's talked about, where this is the Vikings after 3 weeks away from home, settling into a month back at home. They won't be on the road again until Christmas week. A lot comes with that, sorting things out at home and getting things right and adjusting back to being in that mentality. And this was traditionally a spot that was priced at times inaccurate because of that, as the home team typically gets the bump coming off of the road trip if they win. And that's something to keep in mind and consider. I would also say, if you think about Arizona, they struggled on the road against Green Bay in a game that was a little bit ugly weather-wise. Today, they struggled on the road at Seattle in a game that got ugly weather-wise. This is a road game where they're going on the road to play indoors in Minnesota. Seems like they're a pretty sensitive team to weather and conditions. A great game they played on the road was in Miami, where conditions were comfortable. And so, to an extent, they're a little bit impacted from that, perhaps, and a bit sensitive to some of those conditions. And so, this is probably a number that we see settle in that expensive 3.5-4 range. Seattle on the road at the New York Jets. Jets were 1-point favorites on the look ahead. Seattle is now a 1.5-point favorite on the reopen. Lots of questions about what we're going to get from the Jets in this game. I think one is Aaron Rodgers going to be on the field. A lot of conflicting reports. One of them suggests that he was going to be benched in week 4. That's what Woody Johnson wanted. It didn't happen. There is now a growing sense that he is going to be perhaps cut or let go. This is me reading news. This is not me with inside knowledge. This is just a relay of what's happening. And so I think there's a small percentage that happens. There was the tweet from Aaron Rodgers on Saturday that said he does not intend to play for the Jets next year. So, I mean, the season's already over. He signaled he doesn't want to come back. You have an owner who's fired everyone in front of him, who wanted him off the field in week 4. And now there's these growing rumors that he's dealing with several injuries that he's refusing doctors to be able to see and judge that could, which seems like the more likely route, have him placed on IR, potentially. In terms of the probability of those, it's tough to put a number on, but I think there is a small chance that this is a Taylor or Martinez game. I say small in that 15 to 20% range for something that could happen. Now, when I'm looking at this spot, as we have a comment from B. Air, who says, thanks for the CLV on Seattle, got 102 on the money line, up to minus 130 now. I think about this Seahawks defense, which has become just great against the run with some of these changes that they're making. The Jets have been unable to run the football all season. You would think that's a positive for Seattle. On offense, the way that the Jets have been unable to tackle and the way that the Jets have struggled in recent weeks, showing signs of quit, showing lack of pressure, you would think the Seahawks could potentially look comfortable in this spot on offense too. And so I do think it's a good spot for Seattle, but to me, it's a low risk take here on Seattle at minus. I see 1 at Chris. I see 1 minus 06 at Pinnacle. Like if you put that in your account, I put it in the pinned comment on the Wednesday thread, said you put it in your account, you sit on it. If Rodgers is out, Seahawks are 4+ point favorites. If Rodgers is in, I don't know, even with the Jets being bet the last couple of weeks in the market, with how things have changed during this bye week, if there's going to be a big appetite in the market to take the Jets. I don't know if that's going to be the case. And so at worst, if you take this on Seattle, you're looking at like, okay, say the Jets get steamed late week and this closes Jets minus 1.5. You're not in a bad spot. But if you're buying into everything that's happening and the small percentage it happens, you might have a ticket like Green Bay this week where you're way ahead of close and you have options, or you just have a really good bet in your account. So that's how I would look at this one at the moment, especially if you're looking at 1 at your sports book. Tampa Bay on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Buccaneers were 7 on the look ahead. Reopen is 6 at Chris, 5.5 at Pinnacle. Bryce Young looks great. The Panthers are playing alive. The Buccaneers continue to win games. Baker Mayfield looked great, but how much of that was Tampa Bay looking good versus how much of that was the Giants just completely no-showing? In this, looking at ratings, I'm getting to right where this number is. I don't have a big take on this one specifically. I will say if this continues to creep in a little bit lower, I'm seeing 5.5 at Pinnacle. Does Carolina still seem interesting at that number? I don't know, against this front. So Something to keep an eye on and just watch. Not much of an opinion for me on this one specifically. LA, New Orleans still off of the board. Philly, Baltimore still off of the board. San Francisco on the road at Buffalo, mostly off of the board. Purdy is unclear on his status. Said he was hopeful to play in this game. This was Buffalo 3.5. This is now out to as high as 6.5. That number to me signals that it's being bet like Purdy initially is more unlikely to play than he is likely to play. But there's also a couple things to think about in this spot as well. Buffalo should get back both Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman in this game coming out of the bye. So that would be a big boost to the offense. If Brock Purdy does in fact miss and you have those two guys coming back for Buffalo, then I think this is justified, obviously, to be a lot higher and to push 7, certainly. So that's kind of something that's going to keep this game in a bit of handcuffs, if you will, until we get a little bit more news with that. I don't really have a good sense on the Purdy injury. I thought the way it was handled was very odd. The MRI did come back clean, and so it doesn't appear that there's a longer-term injury. But what stood out to me was the Thursday report where the throws that he was making on field just had no zip to them at all. So I think there's a potential that he would miss another game here, just pain tolerance or not fully being ready to go. Obviously, a ton of urgency, though, for San Francisco in this spot with the loss and what the division is looking like. They obviously need a win here in a spot here to stay alive in that division and stay alive in the NFC. So it wouldn't be out of line for them to push Purdy back. Monday Night Football, Cleveland on the road at the Denver Broncos. Broncos from 7.5 down to 5.5, total from 41 up to 41.5. So this is just a clean sort of pick and place adjustment, if you will, from 7.5 through to 5.5. Joseph says he got Denver -3 on the look ahead. I wonder where in the world you were able to do that. Here's my take on this game. This is one that I'll try word it properly. The Browns clearly got up for that game against the Steelers in a big way. Like they were fully bought in to that spot. Players were celebrating all game, big celebration post game. You had the snow, the home field was sold out. Massive game for Cleveland at home. What I wonder a little bit is, was that more Cleveland getting up because of the spot and because of the opponent? Or was that Cleveland saying like, hey, here's the resurgence. Everything's good again. This is what we're going to be pushing forward. I don't quite know the answer for that because I can't get out of my mind how the game prior, Cleveland looked the complete opposite for what they wanted to do on offense. And so I do feel like in this game specifically, and this adjustment specifically, there's an element of buying into what Cleveland did at home on Thursday against the Steelers as being the reality. I don't know if that's fully the truth. This is probably the biggest Broncos home game in, I'm going back to like playoffs with Manning. I would off the top of my head, this is a massive game for Denver at home. Much different scenario for Jameis facing this Broncos pass rush in this environment, in this spot, and for this offense as a whole than anything. But here's where I get a little bit conflicted with this. Bo Nix and the Broncos, they looked good today against the Raiders defense and the Raiders pass rush, finally leaning on the pass. If the Browns defensive front can buy in again for a second game in a row and cause pressure on Nix in the pocket, we could see this Broncos offense take a big step backwards. And so I have a bit of a hard time deciphering through which is true specifically from that Cleveland game. My gut reaction to this, just on the spot without thinking through it much more clearly, is oddly not to run and fade the Broncos, but rather bet against what that was on Thursday night from the Browns, because the advanced stats for that game show Pittsburgh, as lucky as they were with a lot of the big plays, the Browns still conceded some bigger plays in the passing game for sure. And if this is a Broncos team that continues to play with this level of confidence, there's something to be said. But there's also something to be said that the Broncos are or the Browns are being priced the same as the Raiders, which is tough to get to if there's any truth to what we saw on Thursday. So I'm a bit conflicted with that at the moment at this number. But, I mean, this is going to be a massive home game for the Broncos with full buy-in. And so there's going to be some intrigue in this slate. If I'm looking at it now, and like I gave a couple sides that I think you can look at and bet, but I would expect Cincinnati to get to 3 is what I'm looking at from the board right now. Have to figure out what to do with Washington. Have to figure out what to do with Denver. That Seattle ticket's just in your pocket to do with what you wish. And we'll see what happens with the later 2 games on Thanksgiving Thursday is how I would look at this slate. A lot to talk about, a lot to look at. I think the Wednesday live stream preview is going to be pretty good this week as we get even a few more of these games open, like LA Atlanta initially priced at a pick 'em. Like, that's a crazy price. Not crazy off, but I think crazy for a lot of people to hear and look at. And you think about the spot that the Chargers are coming off playing that game tomorrow that's so impactful. Rams Saints, that game is going to look a lot different for LA depending what happens tonight. Same thing with Philly Baltimore. And then again, San Francisco Buffalo, a lot rides on that QB injury in the spot in there. Before I let you go, just want to wrap up. So potential returnees and just injuries to watch for that were not injuries in game this week: Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence, Isaiah Pacheco, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, Devonta Smith, Marshawn Lattimore for Washington, another pro for Washington. In-game injuries this week: David Montgomery said he wants to play. Carlton Davis, unclear. Baker Mayfield had a stinger, but he came back. I don't think that's an issue. Washington, Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler. Minnesota, Sam Darnold left in the fourth quarter with an ankle injury, came back in OT. Is that going to be an impact or not? Gardner Minshew, collarbone. I would expect that that's broken, which means it's Desmond Ridder taking over. And then Romeo Doubs, concussion. If he enters protocol, he's not going to play on Thursday. So, yeah, that would be it. That would be it for me. Hopefully that was a good recap. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. As always, if you have questions, you can leave them in the comment section down below. Enjoy Sunday Night Football. Here's hoping we get a lot of points. Enjoy the game, and we'll chat with you on Tuesday morning. Again, Tuesday, Wednesday shows this week. No Thursday, Friday. Have an awesome Sunday, awesome Monday. We'll chat to you bright and early Tuesday morning.